what I like to look at is what connects people. What are these movement threads that display in most players, despite their coaching history, uh, their their uh, their coaching values, the environment, their belief systems. An example being, Scheffler's feet, Scotty Scheffler's feet is a good story, but there's parts of his movement that are no different to
Yeah.
Justin Thomas, Justin Rose, Rory McIlroy, but that makes a dull story. So we like to look at what he does different. We don't look at what he does the same.
Following his conversation with Mark Ball, Mark is one of the world's best golf biomechanists who's worked with some of the world's elite players. In this conversation, we talk about Mark's experiences, how he got into biomechanics, and the work he does today with elite golfers and those on their way to becoming elite. As you can tell from my voice, I'm struggling a little bit, so apologies for my croaky voice through this episode, but we cover a lot of good stuff. Enjoy. First up, thank you so much for joining me. I was just saying off air, I've known of you for a very long time. We haven't had a chance to talk in person, so really appreciate you coming on. And for anyone listening, so sorry about my voice today. Mark's going to do all of the talking and share all of the interesting stuff, so you won't have to put up with my gravelly voice too much. But for people who hadn't heard of you or don't know so much, could you sort of talk about, I suppose, your past and how you got into golf biomechanics?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, thank you, Will. And your voice sounds great, by the way. There's no issues. So you sound wonderful at this end. Yeah, so thank you. Always a privilege kind of speaking with fellow people like yourself. Real enthusiasts, and so thank you for that. Yes, as far as like a lot of people, it really comes off our own experiences. So as a junior player, I was always my great love was obviously golf. That was I kind of came like a lot of guys in England from a football background as a younger kind of pre-pubescent, kind of 10, 11, 12, that kind of age. Kind of discovered golf one day, and that's a whole different story how I discovered golf. I was doing things I shouldn't be doing. So actually a friend of mine and I, don't know what, in England, we kind of skived off school. We missed school for a day, and we thought we'd just go and go to school. And we went to the golf course and just got some clubs and play golf. And that's how I got into golf. So it came through very serendipitous in many ways. I kind of skived school, bumped off schools as known in the US. And yeah, 40 years on, thankfully, in some ways, that was a very good lesson to miss. But like a lot of people, my exposures to all things, biomechanics, anatomy, for example, came from my own experiences. Always very curious around human movement, performance, anatomy and physiology. I always found it really of intrigue. The human body, kind of why we do what we do, what makes us move the way we do. I didn't have an injury. That's not true, but I had a real shoulder issue in my kind of mid to late teens, and it was always a real conflict. I was gymnastics. I could do all sports to a somewhat okay level, and I thought it's as odd this. I can do all these sports, I can do all these movements apparently, but yet my shoulder when I play golf is always very sore. And there'd be times when I would play, and after 9 holes, it was actually quite unpleasant.
Wow.
That was a lot. That was a lot of conflict. Why? Again, when you're a teenager, the self-awareness can be slightly lower then because of adolescence and whatnot. So I was always very confused. Why can I do the things that I'm asked to do through different sports, but play a game like golf? That was my perception as a teenager. And my shoulders always aching. So I was lucky in many ways that I had that early exposure to pain, performance, those questions that you start to kind of often don't happen until maybe into your 20s, for example. You've been around, players, and they start to mature. They move through adolescence. They move into more kind of adult-based performance. They then start to experience things because of what did or didn't happen, for example, when they were in those adolescent phase. I had it early, so I was quite fortunate, not through any real mine. It was like when I missed golf for a day with my mate, I got into golf, and I was very fortunate. 40 years on, I'm still blessed to do what I do, and I may continue because of a pain on day one. And there's a big thing within movement science that small pains help avoid big pains. So having a small pain on day one helps avoid big pains on day two. So many guys that sustain real can be career defining injuries in some cases never experienced small pains on day one. So I was very lucky that I hopefully avoided the big issues in life because I had the small ones on day one. So those that have gone through golf in some ways and it's been all good, all good, all good, and haven't had those irritations, those inflammations, those small perceived pains, often then experience bigger issues when they get to a different stage in life. So that really is my background. I always loved physiology, anatomy. I still do. I'm even more I wouldn't sort of obsessed, but even more so enthused still around all those areas where I'm at now in life. So I was very blessed, and I kind of a lot of it is a lot of it's often well just the right time, and this is going back to the mid 90s now. Kind of sports science, golf was starting to kind of wake up. So I was very again. I just been there's a thread here. I've been a tremendous overachiever in life. Is the real thread which is happening already here that I kind of woke up to this way of the world in some ways, just at the right tiger, 97. I was 23 then. I kind of waking up to all these new exposures. So yeah, I've been very blessed, and long may that continue. I had a small problem at the right time when we were getting exposed to all this information, and it just really aligned with my great love of all things anatomy, physiology, that kind of stuff, really.
Nice. And then you ended up progressing through Birmingham University.
Yeah, did my PhD at Birmingham, which was a real challenge for me because it again I kind of changed lane very quickly midway through my PhD. I really started to see which that this was part of my defense for those that have been through a Viva, a PhD Viva.
Always a good day.
So I remember at the time that my external examiner was the biomechanist, my internal examiner the physiotherapist, and the independent examiner was a physiologist. I had such a diverse area within my research, and through my PhD in particular, and I really changed. I was thinking I just don't see it this way anymore. So I came into it like a lot of people. I have this question, which is often what a PhD is. You're trying to explore a question on observations. It was in my case. And then I really shifted in a different direction. The more I looked at the research and the more I explored these areas, the more I started to think, I'm not sure about this anymore. So when I presented my Viva, that was my defense. It shows maturity of the research and evolution as a clinician that I can shift around. The challenge was then finding examiners for me, to physiologists, to physiotherapists, to biomechanists. So yeah, that was and I enjoyed it. I actually quite enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the discussion in such a diverse area. It really helped you. And that really is when you look at that. If I look at the last session I've done today with coaches involved and the physios are involved and the players involved, you are having that very diverse discussion. The players there, the coaches are there, the physios there. Sometimes even the caddies are involved. So you're very mindful that you're speaking to all these different people around the same player, but they've all got different objectives, different. They all see the world a bit differently. They all have their different ways of defining development, for example. So that was great for me when you look at it. I will speak to the physio, then go directly to the caddy, and then back to the coach and then to the trainer, for example. So I think having that very diverse background, again, hopefully, it's been very helpful.
Yeah, and there's a few things I want to pick up on there, but I think one thing, just going back to the PhD, because I haven't heard you talk about this before. Just listened to a couple of podcasts, but did you go into the PhD with kind of a deterministic view of trying to find sort of an optimal golf swing technique, and then by the end of it, it was sort of a lot more, well, what is the best way, or how did that transition as you went through?
I mean, even determinism, you could argue everything's deterministic thinking. Does free will exist? And that's a lovely question within philosophy. Is there such a thing as free will? Which, as you could argue, is the scale of being so deterministic thinking for the audience that you have a belief that there's a way of doing something. But I suppose one could then argue having independent values is a form of determinism because you have a belief that that's a way of doing something. So when you look at, say, the philosophy of movement, you could argue everything is deterministic. Someone believes, just to scale it around, say, golf, that players should be left alone. They should evolve organically. It's a very kind of very implicit way. That would be a form of determinism. Versus, say, the more explicit, as you know, in academia, where the very didactic approach, this is the way you must do it, which is historically in recent times often where golf coaching has been more aligned. The coach will tell you what to do. You and I know that's simply not true. So when I went into I finished my master's, went to my PhD, it was very observational. Again, I was just very lucky, very fortunate, because I was working at the same time. I had all these case studies. So I was a very, again, very, very fortunate student as I was then, that I was observing so much. And my great question was, I'd see all these guys develop anatomically and improve their anatomical capabilities, but many of the guys actually get worse. And that was a real conflict again. So you think, well, this guy is, as an example, we'll give some course examples today. They're lifting heavy in the gym. They're doing better through their movement assessments with the physiotherapist. They're not subjected to pain as much, but yet their performance is progressing. That's why is this that all the markers they've been asked to kind of aspire to achieve, so their performance markers of all, again, who set the markers, of course, is a different discussion. The trainers set the markers, not the player. That's a different way you can look at it. But anyway, what they've been asked to do, they've done great, but they're all now performing worse or they're moving worse. So I'd look at, say, through their 3D data, the physios may say, just again, but we'll give some very coarse examples, Will. These aren't actual examples, these are just more. They've got better, just say, rotations through the spine, or they got better foot movement, or they've improved say, their pelvis control, but yet then their movement markers and their goals will often regress. So that really opened up the idea of something called de-skilling, as it's often referred to within kind of more skill acquisition, that the data gets better, but the player gets worse because they get moved so far away from how they see the world. They have these belief systems, as you know, our beliefs drive our behaviors in life. So if we believe X to be true, that will influence our behaviors. Movement's a form of behavior. It's a very expressive form of behavior movement. So often when you start giving people these, say, improved hip ranges or improved kind of muscular capabilities in some ways, why are they getting worse? Because they've yet to learn how to use it, is the real fallout from that. So for sure, no, the spine moves better, they lift heavy, they run quick, all these kind of these performance markers once again. But why their performance values, their movement markers in the goal swing, all becoming very disrupted. The variability is now unhelpful. As you know, there's good variability, there's unhelpful variability. So it's more unreliable. And that really goes back to that neurologically, they've yet to learn how to use these new capabilities that they've been given. And I love that. I really, really enjoyed that. So that was the basis of my PhD thesis in the end, looking at, like a lot of people do, look at it, where's the research around performance in golf and where can we go from there? I went sideways with it. At the end, my final chapter, as you know from your experiences, was all observational case studies over a 12-month period. I looked at golfers over a year, that when they're exposed to any kind of feedback, how their movements then responded to a stimulus, whether it be a coaching stimulus, a physiotherapy stimulus, an environmental stimulus. They go from, say, for those who know England, I'm a member at a place called Burnham and Barrow, a very nice links course in Somerset. But we lived in Florida for a long time, so that's like the bookend in some ways the environment. Even the grasses you play from and make people move differently. The ambient temperature, the light, for example, as you know, within physiology, light is so influential on our biological processes. So I went in a real sideways direction, which I really enjoyed, but that created a big conflict then. That who was going to examine this?
I mean, it sounds like it laid a really good basis for what you do now. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I think going through when I was doing, say, did more of my master's on golf biomechanics, but you look at the literature, there wasn't much really that helped with golf performance. There was a huge amount in terms of analyzing movement and saying X factor stretch, kinematic sequence. But the problem with it is it was so depart away from hitting a golf ball and actually shooting the lowest score possible. So I was the same as you. I kind of got in it from, I want to understand how we control movement, how we learn. And then I very quickly realized we need to measure stuff. And therefore, biomechanics is quite important. So I got in it that way. But I think that was one of the things I really want to speak to you about, because my experiences when we used to do a lot of biomechanics up at Leeds Met, you now Leeds Beckett, I suppose, RIP to that.
My wife went to Leeds University, so I have a small connection there.
Oh, okay. I was at Leeds for my PhD, so I was over there for my PhD. I did both, just so everyone hated me. But you talk to golfers and they go, "I love to do golf biomechanics," and you think, yeah, but putting these 60-odd markers on a lab on you isn't going to tell us much about how you're actually going to strike the middle of the club face more or hit the ball consistently in a straighter direction. It can be very depart. So this is one of the reasons I want to speak to you. What does golf biomechanics and performance look like to you? So what are some of the challenges, as you've talked about, around optimizing movement and it may be affecting performance? And then I suppose, how do you go about it today with this sort of holistic approach?
I think what a wonderful question. I think initially there you look at it, that not all that counts can be counted. And that's a big thing within movement performance. This rhetoric that we often promote within, if you can't measure it, but that's true to a level for sure. Of course it is. But like I said, not all that counts can always be counted. Um, you can get guys that move worse on some days but win, and then move better on the next day and lose
Mm.
for many, many, many reasons. I mean, so you look at it. This is my very divided brain again in many ways. That you look at, say, why and how we perform and move. They're really controlled by kind of two main, beliefs and attention. Beliefs and emotion. Sorry. So our beliefs drive our behaviors. So if someone believes X to be true, and I'll give you an example of this in a second, actually. That's often why they move the way they do. And also our emotions drive our attention. So what the emotions you have, so the girl I've just finished with, there's a lot of anxiety based on certain hole shapes. So when she sees certain hole shapes and certain, really makes her feel anxious. So anxious is a anxiety in many ways, coarsely speaking, is an anticipation of what may happen. Stress is a response. Like, for example, DOMS in your ward, you get muscle soreness because you've stressed the tissue invariably the day before. But anxiety is often more aligned with an anticipation of what may happen. She gets very anxious, so she moves different. Now, can you measure this? So can you now measure these perceptions or these emotions? But it certainly displays in how they move. So very much, I really look a lot with players, what emotions they're being exposed to and how that's driving their attention. So, example, some days will be with the same player will, and they're not get too stressed about, for example, just say their hand path. The following day they've had an argument and a bad mood, they're irritable, the hand path's not a big deal, but it's the same hand path as yesterday. It's the same trace. Why is it an issue today? Because you're seeing the world very differently, because you're in an irritated mood. And I tell you a small story if we have time, from a guy I spoke to yesterday, PJ Tour player, just had a stress fracture of his spine. So that's very measurable in some ways. You can look at, say, to a level, the ranges the spine's moving through, the forces are being exposed to. But as you know, joint ranges are very poor markers of pain. A lot of it connects back to tissue tolerance, the nervous system sensitivity to certain movements, how resilient they are within their tissues, and also their perception of pain. Some guys just go, whatever. Some guys are very nervous of anything. So this, I say young guy, and they're all young now, we're all compared to this young guy, kind of early 20s, plays on the PJ Tour, just had a real bad stress fracture, pars defect of his lumbar spine. And actually went back to his very first coaching lesson as an 11-year-old. He had a coach told him, you mustn't ever move your head. So he had this real belief, okay, right, this coach who at the time was the national coach, or sorry, my apologies, he was the college coach, sorry, my mistake. And so the perception was, this guy is, and that's often you look at it with players, the information being given is not that important, but who gives the information is vital. So often not what's said is important. If it comes from this person who's perceived to be the absolute revered figure, therefore it must be true. And this was this young lad's experience. So this particular coach had a belief that you mustn't move your head. Now, as you and I know, that simply doesn't exist in golf or any movement, any form of locomotion, head moves. So he spent the last 12 years not moving his head. Now, 12 years on, in response to that, he's now suffered a stress fracture because of what his spine's been exposed to, because of a belief he inherited as a 10-year-old with his dominant figure, but he was just really, starting on that exploration of golf. So those are examples where, for sure, you can explore movement through motion capture, force plates, even forms of EMG to a small level, that kind of stuff. But you actually look at why they do this. Often when you start to look at their belief systems, why do players believe X to be true? In the case of the young lad with his head, created a spine issue because he just adapted his spine for the head not to move. Then that adaptation over time, for the listeners, they're called biological accumulations. These bioaccumulations, you accumulate over life to the point where they go, today, no more, I'm done. And the young lady who gets a lot of anxiety because she anticipates, and the movement is based on anticipation. There's kind of 4 phases to movement. It all goes anticipation, detection, sensory awareness, and then expression. So movement is a form of expression. You anticipate, You detect, you get a sensory piece of feedback to which you then express movement. As her anticipation changes, she expresses her movement differently. So that's why I kind of really enjoy that. There's things that you and I in particular can look at through, just say, for example, 3D, and we can really see. So a good example, the young girl today, we looked at, say, that the club couples, the kinetics of the club, that how she has a very different club delivery based on levels of anxiety. So you've kind of got something, which we can track and measure tangibly through the club couples. But then the idea not all that counts can be counted because how do we tangibly label? I'm sure the psychologists will know this a million times more than I will. So for my friends in psychology, I sincerely apologize for really destroying this. And I'm sure there's many people now screaming, and rightly so, by the way. And to actually start to measure, obviously you can look at, say, cortisol and that kind of stuff within, say, blood markers, but that's not obviously realistic in a session. How do you then start to kind of measure the influence of being anxious on our movements? So I think when you can start to connect those two areas, that's a fun day. The discussions you get are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They're truly organic.
Yeah, I love to hear that, and I think it shows the power of being able to measure what we can measure, and as you say, to a degree, because you can take these abstract concepts that we know are really important, say anxiety or perception of a task, and that you can start to understand how it changes the movement pattern. And then we're so fortunate these days with launch monitors to
Yeah.
then be able to evaluate the outcome and why a shot happened so much. So I suppose that's a lot on, I suppose, the limitations and then how you can potentially link biomechanics to it. I'm going to give you a really tough task here, Mark, because I know there's no perfect answer to this, but
But you want one.
yes, because you're a wise man who's seen many, many elite players. So as I sort of was thinking about this call, as I talked about earlier, there is some goodish research on trying to understand how we improve distance in golf. But I think one of those critical things that I never really found in the academic literature was more around how do we improve accuracy and sort of consistency of ball striking and club face control. I know there's not going to be a perfect golf swing. We're well aware of that, but what traits or what aspects of biomechanics do you tend to look at? What's your process, maybe, if that's useful? Take that however you can. But that'd be great to hear some insight.
No, that's a good one. I mean, I actually have within my 3D system. Again, I've been very lucky. I designed it myself, so I've been very fortunate to kind of design it based on how I'd like to use it in a very humble way. So I kind of move between two pages in some ways. The very historical segmental data, so the rotational, the orientations and the translations for those that are more familiar with the language around biomechanics. So the positional changes of the segments and the ranges they move through. I also have performance markers, and those performance markers, as you say, come from observation. So what I look at with most players, Will, is what connects players rather than what separates. Life is very good at demonizing. Life is very good at polarizing. I mean, as you and I speak the day before an election globally, I won't say which one, but I'm sure everyone's going to work it out. Yeah. So life likes to demonize. And what I like to look at is what connects people. What are these movement threads that display in most players, despite their coaching history, their coaching values, the environment, their belief systems. An example being Scheffler's feet. Scotty Scheffler's feet is a good story, but there's parts of his movement are no different to
Yeah.
Justin Thomas, Justin Rose, Rory McIlroy, but that makes a dull story. So we like to look at what he does different. We don't look at what he does the same. So I have a page within my system, and this really comes from my own case study experience of movements that you invariably see in almost all established players. I kind of look at the relationship between the kind of the trail arm and the pelvis. I see a lot from the face-on view. And I can certainly share some images with the audience around this that had that impact. The elbow normally aligns in the middle of the pelvis in that 3D world. I look a lot at the compression expansion of the thorax and pelvis because that really aligns with anatomy. That all we can really do within movement is expand and compress. That's our movement system. I look at some other markers around the position of the pelvis relative to its rotation. I look at the lead shoulder movement. So why those movements? I mean, if you go back to the research, I remember when I did I prepared for my defense of my Viva again. I was preparing for why that value. Well, where's the research? Well, you'd say, well, as you know from your experience, why do you look at rotation? Because the research suggests blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. So really, all these markers I look at have come from looking at players and see these tremendous threads that it's very unusual to ever see an established player not do certain movements, and very unusual to find an established player ever um, really do them poorly. So I've looked at these movements um, that most players do. So I kind of jump between the two of them. So in some ways, I've devised again my own little kind of performance markers that it's just what people do, just what people do. And if someone goes, well, can you defend that? Well, it's an observation of the last 30 years to date, pretty much, being around players that when the guys are moving well, they're pain free, they're clearly in a good place, they're performing nicely. And this is a bit often ignored within that they can relate to it, they can win with it. They see real contextual relevance to it.
Mm.
I forget what's it called, contextualism within psychology. I forget. Apologies again to my psych friends, but it's called, I think it's contextualism, where they can see real context in. I think we call it mindfulness now, but they're really aware of why they do what they do and how what fits within their own little ecological system. And so when they do all that, they move this way. So that's my little performance page. So that I look at a lot with every player that, when you look at these threads. So I say to most guys, well, that history often leaves the answer. Success will leave clues in life. If you look close enough, history leaves the answer. It leaves a trail in some ways. And if you look at the trail, you see these threads pretty much in every player.
I love that. And I think as well as the observation that kind of this is what seems to be consistent besides a lot of differences between these players, that's sort of one thing. But then also you've got the sort of the first principles aspect that back it up, because it really is how much force you're applying to that club head or
Yeah,
handle, I suppose.
yeah.
And then essentially how that controls face angle and strike. And I think the trail arm and the arms are one of those things that's so difficult to measure in biomechanics. So I think you and some other sort of influential biomechanists have been really important in driving coaching. It's interesting because what you'll see is a layer of what players have gone through coaching.
Yeah.
So you probably get this sort of blurred view of what comes in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in a few years as maybe coaching improves and evolves, and then you kind of see the result of what comes into your lab. But that's really useful, I think, to understand and see.
Sorry, I think the trade there, Will, was so one thing I forgot to mention is that lovely interaction between experience and evidence. Now, I know many guys with great evidence, but with no experience of working with players and vice versa. Guys with great experience, but no evidence to support what they say. So the needle's kind of almost doing this. You're kind of moving between where's the evidence, what's your experience of this. So I think I try, I guess, humbly, you try and get that. Let's have what's the experiences of players, coaches, physios, whatever. And then the evidence to support this. And that's the little trade you get really between those two.
Nice. No, I really like that. Um, that's been really useful, and I look forward to actually listening back to that and picking apart what you said in that little section. Because for me, as a coach and as a player, I'm still trying to improve, and
Always, yeah.
I'm okay inside 50 yards. I'm pretty decent at that, but it was always the approach play and the consistency that I really struggled with. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And then I've got one question just to kind of wrap up with, which again I'm really intrigued to hear your answer with based on your experience and where you are. So where do you see the future of biomechanics going? We all know distance is going to be this thing that takes over, in spite of what the RNA do in terms of rule changes. But where do you see biomechanics going in the next sort of 2 to 5 years?
I think as I look at you, I'm looking up to my top shelf in my office now, and I don't have many biomechanical textbooks there. I'm looking at them. But the ones I do have are very much around, and again, I get it. Again, it's within context of what the book was written for. So, a great respect for the authors. That's what they were written for, really. But they're just very much around, the rigid physics, the mechanics of movement. I think what we're starting to see now is it will be a lot more embracing of why we move this way. So again, I think you'll start to see now. You'll start to connect more psychology to movement. You'll start to connect more now. Understanding, say, individual human frame shapes. So the shape of the human, you get people like a John Ram versus say Justin Thomas. How you'll see more individual behaviours within movement now based on frame shape. So I think it will start to now kind of reach out more to connect with all these different areas. People that dismiss that pseudoscience and whatnot, but it's not because that's real. I mean. you look at in very what science does, well, it really just confirms what we knew 50 years ago was true. That's a lot of science. So I read a great book recently called The Attention Fix by a guy called Dr. Anders Hansen, which I loved. Disturbing book, but brilliant. And his work is around the influence of mobile phones, cell phones on kids. So for those in North America, cell phones, for those, say, for example, UK mobile phones. And he goes, we won't know this stuff until 10 years' time now. So if you read this in 24, we'll know the fallout, what your son or daughter is doing next door on their phone now, we'll know in 10 years' time. And that's the first guy I've read is actually something I've always believed, and that research is normally 10 years behind. Just because, research, you need research to give credibility, but that you just can't, it can be anarchy. So research is in some ways polices it manages the nonsense. You need that. It's the filter system. But then I say to most guys, there's never a solution in life, just a trade. The trade of research is it's always behind. It's like, say, within, say, athletics or sports. I mean, the drug testing is always behind the drug cheats. You can only test on what they're using, so they're always a little bit behind. And so I think biomechanics will hopefully start to embrace all these different areas now. How nutrition, I do a lot of work on nutrition on players around foods can be very inflammatory and change how they move based on what they've just eaten. So look at things like hydration, nutrition, how they eat, when they eat relative to learning, for example, hydration levels, which is pretty well established now in terms of cognition. I do a lot of work with players around things like travel and jet lag on their movements, so how time zone changes really influence their learning. And my big obsession currently is light, the influence of light within how we move. Especially you and I record this in November in England. The clock's changed last week, it's getting all dark now. That how disruptions on our circadian rhythms really influence then hormonal releases, melatonin, for example, cortisol, based on light exposures. And that really influences our ability to learn. So there's times of the day when we are aligned more to learn in train, for example. There's times a day where we're less aligned to learning, do certain training. So I look a lot now around light exposures, especially Saturday was my first day actually inside pretty much all year in an indoor studio. I did not feel good under artificial blue light, but it's the same light all day. So my brain's being told it's the same time of day for 8 hours. Felt dreadful. So I've been outside all summer. So I think you'll start to see it more that way now. Things like light exposure is a big one because we are exposed to more devices these days. And, loosely speaking, a device gives off the same light. It's around about the kind of 1 to 2 p.m. sun. So if you're looking at devices at 8 o'clock at night whilst you're trying to learn, your brain's so conflicted. It's being told it's 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., whatever the sunlight is compared to. But you should be then going into that early phase of rest. So they move so differently, so differently. So that's, I think, hopefully it will start to embrace these areas more.
It'd be interesting to see. So I think I'll put out of that, I suppose, the contextual aspects of understanding performance and how biomechanics changes.
Yeah.
And then this idea of motor equivalents or unique movement solutions and trying to allow for them and understanding how that's going to be really cool. And I think one paper that was coming to mind, which was actually one of my favorites when I was back doing a master's, is, do you remember I don't know if you ever came across it, the javelin throwing paper from Bartlett, Wheatley, and someone else, where they essentially went to look at the top three javelin throwers back in 1996, so Steve Batley and a couple of the others. And they went with the idea of what's going to be the optimum technique. We're going to do 3D motion capture with these three javelinists. And what they essentially found when they looked at the data was that they all did it differently, but when they plotted the angle of the javelin and the pitch of the javelin, they realized there was no perfect solution. Actually, these three people were all within this contour map, and it's a great little way of saying a pitch can tell a whole story of science. They were equivalently good with very different techniques. So I remember that paper really informing the way I thought about research. But it's so tricky to do that research and do it well. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of golf and what wise insights you have yourself in the coming years to map those movements and different movements onto potentially sort of similar impact factors and outcomes. Now that's awesome. I really, really appreciate your time. It's been so nice to finally have a catch up and a chat with you.
Likewise.
And thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your insight. So just to wrap up, if people want to get in touch with you, where's best to reach out?
So my website, ball3d.net. And my Instagram account is Ball3D Academy. So always happy we want to help you in any way, any of your listeners. But I'm very mindful that on a longer podcast, I can share my story about I've had so much help in life through many, many, many people, to which I'm always very mindful and grateful of. So I'm very aware that I need to reciprocate. So I'm always very happy to help anyone. I've received much help from many people in life, and long may that continue in a good way. So I'm always very happy to help anyone. So if anyone needs any guidance, help, support, whatever, please reach out. I'm more than happy in any way.
Appreciate that, Mark. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Rob. Thanks again.